This will be recorded as usual, or at least as close to as usual as we can do, given the circumstances. So obviously, it's our first ever remote event, Londroid webinar. First event we do where you can join without your pants on.
True also for the speakers.
Well, let's keep it interesting. Beyond that, we're gonna have a slight change in the format. Let us know what you think, both on Slack, if you're there, or through the Londroid Twitter. Just send us a message on either, and we're always happy to hear your feedback and improve in future versions of this event. We're gonna have 2 talks based on remote. So we clearly have a theme going on today. First one up is gonna be Daniele, who works at Novoda as an Android developer. And then we're gonna have Jairo, who's an engineering manager at Badoo. We're gonna try and keep things, as I said, on time. So if you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A section. So you should see at the bottom bar of Zoom a Q&A option. So any questions you have, just put them there. At the end of the second talk, so in about half an hour from now, we're gonna go through as many questions as we can. If we don't get to answer them all in this event, we are going to follow up. So don't worry, your questions won't go unanswered. We will be posting the answers offline after the event if we run out of time, but we will be doing everything we can to stay on track. So hope everyone's okay with that. Thanks for your understanding and being here today. And I think we're good to go. So first up, we have Daniele. He's going to be talking about some general tips and tricks for teams that work remotely.
Okay, wait a second, let me share my screen. Okay, I think you should be seeing this. So hello everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Dimitris. My name is Daniele, and today we are going to talk to you about some things we learned about remote working at Novoda. In the last years, we started working more and more remote, and we learned a couple of things. We started from a single office in London, and then over the years, we expanded to different offices in different cities and countries. We started having some people working full-time remote. I was one of the first, and some people working from home a few days a week. This was not only distributed across countries, different cities, of course, but also in different time zones. And this was not only infecting the company, but it was also affecting some projects, because team members of a single project, they were not always in the same location, but they started to be distributed in several cities. Now we reached the highest level of distribution, let's say, of remote working, because everybody, given the current situation, is working from home. And then some of the things that are important for a team working in general are even more important when we are working remote. First one being communication. To communicate, we mostly use internally at Novoda instant messaging in the form of Slack. There are several tools out there, of course, which you can use for instant messaging and communication, but Slack is the one that we found suits our needs better. And of course, most of you might know what Slack is, but there are a couple of things that we started doing to improve our productivity in Slack. First one being, let's give priority to public channels. So using more public channels and public communications over one-on-ones, chats, or private channels helps us having more discoverable communication, more searchable messages, and especially it allows people to be more involved in other communication. So if I want to discuss a new feature to be developed with some of my team members, instead of posting them a direct message, let's give priority to a thread maybe in a public channel, so that this thread can be searched in the future and can be also accessed by other people to give more feedback and more visibility. Availability is another important concept when talking about online communication. With this, I don't mean that we should always be online and available on Slack. Especially in this period where everybody is working from home, it's very important to take some breaks from the screen. But it's also important that your team members know when you are online, when you are offline, and especially what to expect from you. Like it's totally normal to not reply immediately to a message, but at the same time, it's good to say, okay, guys, I'm going to have a break now. Let's see, let's chat again in half an hour. If you need me, just post it, but don't expect a reply immediately. This is related to the next point, which is priorities and the urgency of a message. Chat, instant messaging is a good, of course, meaning of communication, but it's still asynchronous. If you need something which needs to be immediate and to have maybe a more complex discussion, jump on a call is always a good thing to do. Otherwise, if you want to do something that could stay for longer, consider the use of good old emails. They still work. Another thing that we use usually to better organize communication with our projects is the use of several channels for a single project. Usually what we do is to have a main channel, which is client-facing as well, where we have also QA, we have shareholders from the stakeholders from the client, etc., etc. But that one is just one of the channels. Then we have several others that are only internal. And this is not to prevent, to hide the information from the client, but it's simply to not overload them with some technical information that might not be interesting to them. And at the same time, to help us having a more structured conversation on different features and different technical topics that might not be that relevant for the client. Always talking about projects, an important way of sharing information is the daily stand-up. This is a meeting that we do every day with a client where we share the advancements of the project. We discussed what we did the previous day, what we are planning to do the current one. And in this one, it's very important that the client, for a client representative to be present, or in general, a project or a product representative, because it's the right moment where to ask for some clarifications or to raise any blockers that could reduce our efficiency or anyway that could block us from doing what we are planning to do. Another important meeting is, another important part of the process is to improve our way of working. And we do this usually through some retrospective at the end of each period. Usually what you would do for this, if everybody was in the same office, was to use a white wall, a whiteboard, and a lot of post-its and gather idea, collect them, vote them, and select what are the actions that we want to start doing for the next period. Of course, this is not doable in this period, but in general, it's not very feasible with a very distributed team. So something we started doing is to use some remote tools. For example, Retro is a great one, which is specific to retrospective, or even more generic one, for example, Miro, which is a digital whiteboard. This is great not only for retrospectives, but in general to share ideas, to comment, and to do a lot of brainstorming, let's say. This is something that we do in any phase of a project. In general, if we want, we can do the same or other things with, let's say, less sophisticated tools, but that allow us still to collaborate while being remote. The Google Suite is a great one with slides, docs, and spreadsheets. allowing us to collaborate on the same document while being in different locations. There are, of course, alternatives to these tools made by several other companies, but the general idea is that you should not rely on a single file or a single location. You should allow remote people to collaborate on the same discussions on the same topic. Once the ideas that you were gonna brainstorm are somehow finalized, let's say, or they reached a state where they should be ready to be shared, now is where we start using another tool, which is called Basecamp. And this is great because it allows us to expand the audience for a given idea, for a new feature, for a new possible client, whatever, to a wider audience. This again, it has a lot of rules for visibility. You can restrict them to the company only, to some clients, or even just a subset of team members. But the idea is that with this one, you can increase the visibility and get feedback for even more people to get validations about your ideas. This was always good for, of course, a single client, but regarding sharing information, it's good to have it on a wider level. So talking about company-wise, what we are doing is to have a daily stand-up. This is similar to the project one I discussed before, but is company-wise, and it's a great opportunity where to discuss advancement in the company or in other projects where you are not directly involved every day. But also it's good to share information about the business, new decision, any company-wise detail that could be worth sharing. This is pretty good for us, given the size of our company. We do it every day, but depending on the size of your company, you might want to do it less often. For example, having it weekly or every month or so. It doesn't need to be called a stand-up. It could be called an all hands, a town hall. I've heard a lot of names for this, but the idea is to share information and to also gather questions from a wider audience. And this is also great because it allows you to get feedback from a larger number of people inside your company. We are talking about meetings, and for that, when there are a lot of things that we can do to make them more remote friendly. First of all, the fact that any meeting should be in calendar, even if it's an improvised one. You shouldn't have improvised meetings in general, but if you do, try to put that one in calendar anyway, even if it's at the last second. The reason is that, as we will see later, people that are attending that meeting, they are gonna be automatically busy, so that the people outside the meeting in the company, they know that that people is busy doing something else, is chatting with you, and then you are increasing visibility of what's happening. Of course, you should have an agenda, a description, so that people knows what to expect when attending this meeting. And also remember that, as I mentioned before, we should try to take some breaks, especially when working from home, because we have less human contact that forces us to take some breaks. So try avoiding the lunch time to make big meetings. Try to respect other people's time when organizing them. There are then a couple of tips regarding good behavior in general, which is to have just one person to speak at a time, which might seem trivial, but is not. It makes a lot of difference, helping people understanding each other while being remote. Another thing, try having your camera always on, because it makes a huge difference to be speaking of a moving face compared to a blank static avatar. As I mentioned before, it's important that meetings are in calendar and that everybody has a shared calendar, a private shared calendar. There might be some levels of sharing. You might just want to have to share the time slots where you are busy, or you might want to share also the title of the event you are attending. In any case, it's good to have this visibility so that people can find the best time to schedule a new meeting, being sure that all the needed attendees can actually participate. And another point is very important, and this is what we are doing even now, is to record. Recording meeting, it has a good advantage of being allowing you to find again the discussion in the future in case you were addressing some important topic and you want to revisit in the future. But also, even simpler, it allows people that are off today to be able to see what happened, to see if they missed something that could be important for them, even if they were just off, or in a different time zone. That's another thing to consider. And finally, just one last note I want to finish my talk with. Remember that not everybody choose to work remotely, especially in this period. So try to put an extra effort to be communicative, to try to search for an informal chat, or even just ask, how are you? And consider that not everybody is always used to work remotely. And there are also some tools to stay in touch, like one that we developed, or in general, there are several others where we can basically help us regaining that human touch that being always remote is difficult to get. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniele. We already have a couple questions, which, as mentioned, we're going to be answering afterwards. Thanks for the the textual claps. Without further ado, I'm going to be introducing us to the second speaker, which is Jairo, engineering manager at Badoo, who are also today's sponsor of this event. So thank you very much to Badoo, first of all, for having us. And Jairo, whenever you're ready, we can get started on the presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dimitris, for the introduction. And thank you very much, Danielle, as well for sharing all these tips. Let me share my screen. So, okay, can you see it already?
Yep.
Yep, okay. So, so this is going to be a bit more about adapting your team to remote work. So first, let me introduce myself. As Dimitri said, my name is Jairo, and I'm engineering manager at Magic Lab. And for those who don't know about us, we are the company behind the social networking applications Badoo, Bumble, Lamen, and Chappy, amongst others. Across our different brands, we have 500 million registered users worldwide. And behind the scene, there are over 650 employees, roughly, and 300 of them are engineers, spread into different offices around the world. So today I would like to share with you how we switched our mind about remote teams in our mobile department. As you might know, Magic Lab is a great company with amazing coffee, office spaces, amazing coffee as well, in the center of vibrant cities and mind-blowing perks. Okay, that's cool. But despite of having some infrastructure teams in our Moscow office, everyone who was dedicated to product development was based in London. In my specific case, I've never had to worry too much about remote work at all, or even evaluated the possibility of remote working. So in practice, the first time I really tried remote work environment in Magic Lab was by accident, and it was literally. So I got badly injured playing football, and I would require surgery, lots of physiotherapy, working from home, like many weeks, and almost a year to fully recover. I could dig into details, but short story long, by accident, I realized about some things. So first, having built trust with my team helped me greatly during this period. And to be honest, the management part was not hard at all. Knowing that you can count on each other when something goes wrong and that the communication really flows no matter what was really a peace of mind for me and for my team. I was not also struggling asking everyone what they were doing because we have a very well-established process that enhanced the autonomy of the engineers and provided transparency about ongoing stuff. So responsibilities were very clear and everyone knew what to do without much supervision. But there was some cons I discovered. The first of them was there was really strong culture of discussing important things in place. You know, even my face was on every meeting room's TV, and we have glasses meeting rooms, so actually my face was all over the office, right? Yeah, there was a strong culture of discussing things in place. So even this, I was perceived as not available for people that actually didn't see me in the corridors and so on. Some people even thought that I was going to leave the company because they didn't get to see me, right? But the thing that bothers me the most is that some topics were delayed until I got back to the office somehow, right? It's this perception that if you're not there, you need to wait till the next day to discuss something, but the next day you will be in some weeks, right? In my situation. So about inclusion, I was also left out of some conversations that happened on the spot, and I had to catch up later. And I also discovered that our remote tools and processes, even they were there because we have some remote teams, but they were not very spread in our mobile department. Nevertheless, the overall experience was positive, and I really value the flexibility that Magic Lab and my team had, and yeah, it was good. But to be honest, having my physiotherapy, elevation, and icing sessions in the office was not optimal, as you might think, right? Not to mention commuting to the office with half my leg, and in the back of my bicycle, it was my son, right? Commuting to the nursery as well. So we were thinking about the situation and many other people's situations and how greatly they could benefit from good remote processes, starting by our mobile department. So we were thinking, it's time to expand to a new location. Since growth was unavoidable for us and our London office was starting to be fully packed, we started wondering that maybe, just maybe, it was time to expand our mobile engineering team to a different location. For example, to Moscow. And we already had an office in Moscow, as I mentioned. It was really nice with some infrastructure teams. And also, Badoo tech brand is still really strong in Russia. And we could find very good talent without the relocation overhead. But there were some boundaries. The idea of building an autonomous team, the idea of building an autonomous team requires people from different roles, and we wanted to limit the experience to cover our urgent needs, which was just hire new mobile developers and not relocating anyone. So we were not going to hire product managers, no QAs, just mobile developers. And with these boundaries, the only option was to integrate all the new hires into one of the existing teams in London office. So create an autonomous team, and there's these boundaries was not an option. This created a lot of questions, as you can imagine, and we already had a perception that our processes could mostly handle the situation. But for example, what will happen with our amazing team buildings we already have in my team? Now we will have a separate part of the team in another city. What is going to happen, right? Who will be their manager, right? How can they execute properly projects if they are not here? We had a lot of questions, right? But nevertheless, it looked viable, and we said, okay, let's try. So despite all these questions, I took responsibility over it. And if I could do my job as a manager for home for several weeks with my leg elevated and so on, but why not to try and manage people in Moscow remotely? In the worst scenario, we will gain an amazing experience and it will be worth the effort. So let me talk about the challenges we have and the learnings we had so far after 1 year, because this is already 1 year ongoing, right? So the first, do not lose the in-person touch. Summary, everything can be done remotely, but seeing each other in person from time to time boosts the overall experience with the company and the team. This is not easy to organize, I agree, but for us, it's really rewarding, and I will recommend it totally. Starting from the interviews. For prospective candidates, it's really important to see where they will be working from and who with. It actually helps with positive decision-making and building trust. The same during the onboarding. And not less important, keeping this feeling recursively, arranging quarterly business trips and biannual team buildings. In our experience, there is an appreciable difference in easygoing conversations and team mood before and after these in-person interactions. We knew that, and in the current situation with the COVID-19, believe me, we try to find any excuse just to keep up with that. From online team lunches, coffees, games, anything you can think of. More learnings, this time management and reporting. As I mentioned at the beginning, something that really helped me when I was working from home was having a relationship of autonomy and trust with my reports. So I usually share many on-site informal activities with everyone, with my peers, my team, And as a remote manager, this is more difficult. But if there is just one thing I can recommend to all of you is please, please do not skip one-on-ones. This does not only apply to managers, it applies to reports as well. It doesn't matter how busy we are, what are we doing, do not skip one-on-ones. Do not forget also the importance of a small talk and just go straight away to open topics. You know, people cannot see you and you cannot see them during the day. So it is very important to open yourself. Oh, sorry, I forgot this one. Don't skip one-on-ones, right? Also, to support your one-on-ones, it's recommendable to have a good structure of meetings around. So anchoring your team with regular all-hands meetings can create structure which your team can build their schedule and when to show up and participate. Just call it planning, call it tech discussions over tea time, retrospectives, any kind of recorded meetings. Something that really worked for us during the team retrospective is very simple question to everyone, which is rate your sprint from 0 to 5. And this actually really helped people to open up. One last thing, and this should be basic, but in a remote environment, it's extremely important to agree on expectations. Agree how performance is measured and provide timely feedback in both directions. Remember that you're striving for autonomy. And just beware, do not do this in your first one-on-one straight away. If you're a manager or tech lead, it might be overwhelming for new joiners. So it's important to build trust first and then agree on these expectations. Okay, something really important as well in your remote office or remote workers, access to equipment, tools, and resources. Sometimes we think that just providing a laptop is enough, but that is only true if everything else is online, right? So the main advantage of working from the office is the access to equipment and resources. But if this is not an option, it should not be an excuse. So very important, IT and HR support should be fully accessible. They should have clear and accessible policies as well. Company-wide communication and planning tools. Let it be email, video calls, chat. Just choose. If you choose to go with Slack, the whole company go to Slack. If you choose to go with Meet, the whole company goes with Meet, right? This is the key to use the discovery and initiation of conversation with whoever you need. Digital workspace. This is essential. So you can find not the people, but what you need as easy as possible. Starting from company-wide tracking and planning tools. Again, if you choose Jira, Trello, go for it, but everyone the same. Having an employees directory with all the relevant information and the team they belong, points of contact, and so on, right? Also team presentation cards with access to updated documentation, wikis, contact, goals, dashboards, anything that you might need to discover what this team is doing. So it's actually like when you enter in a team area and you actually feel like, okay, this area is painted in blue and it belongs to this team and this is the tech lead, and you have the whiteboards with all the Scrum plans. All these things need to be online, need to be accessible first for the team, and second for whoever is interested on, right? Which leads me to development process. And the golden rule here is to make sure that whatever development process you have in your team, it should enhance autonomy and ease collaboration. Why? Something very important thing to consider is the diffusion of responsibility. If the team is responsible, then nobody's responsible. And I promise that having a remote team will not help with this at all. So some of the things your process needs to clarify is who is accountable for the project and what's the due date, who is responsible of what inside the team, and make sure that your team understands and agrees with it. You also want to avoid per case discussions as much as possible. So try to have a development process that works for 95% of the cases and allows great transparency. Do not forget to have really killer dashboards or Jira, Trello, or whatever, reflecting the situation. And also, very important, a way to recursively report changes in projects. So call it weekly meetings, whatever, but it should be pretty transparent what is happening. Also working within a team, Daniele already mentioned the time difference, okay? The main problem working with somebody not physically present is what you feel when this person does not answer your chat messages or grab a call straight away. So to avoid this, the first and the most important is to provide enough transparency about availability. After all, working remotely means working as well, but everyone has to commit and respect each other's boundaries equally. Having a visible calendar and common for the whole company helps. Setting up properly working hours and committing to it, adding breaks, lunchtime, gym, and others. You don't need to add like gym. You can add a busy, right? It can be private, but it should be there. Right? As Danielle mentioned, we need to be aware of the boundaries and make sure when we can have other people accessible. And last but not least, we need to understand each other's situation and plan in advance and manage expectations properly with your collaborators. If you're working with somebody which is 10 hours difference, you just need to talk and you just need to know, okay, when can we do this? When can we do that? And plan in advance every single iteration that you have. Yeah, okay, sorry, I forgot this one. Anyways, I'll continue. Another important point, preventing isolation. The most important thing I noticed when I was working from home was constantly reminding people, hello, I'm here. So I highly recommend promoting the involvement of remote employees in all company processes as soon as possible. Some examples. You hire a new engineer, so this engineer, since the very beginning, since you actually can, try to involve in interviewing, mentoring new developers despite of the office, doesn't really matter. If you're running committees inside your company, try to promote the participation in these cross-team efforts. And overall, I recommend not to limit the participation in important or high priority projects just because they are far away. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Some other thing is the proper use of common language in public forums. Okay, we have suffered from having tickets written in Russian, you can imagine, which are accessible to everyone, or some public channels of monitoring, people speaking different languages. Don't do that, okay? So, and try to do in a common language and try to do with a proper written language. If your company can afford it, really supporting employees with language classes makes the difference. And last but not least, I would like to give you some overall topics that will help you with long-term relationships. So first, seeing each other's faces really helps nurturing familiarity between team members. Do not avoid it. If you go into a meeting room, enable your cam. That's the golden rule. And daily stand-ups are a great way to keep up with this. Seeing your team every day, as Danielle mentioned, really helps in this. With remote teams, you don't share moments in common areas, such as the kitchen, but this is no excuse for not having proper forums of discussions to address these hot topics. For example, company all hands tech talks with questions and answers, right? Do not wait until there is a problem to discover it because it might be too late. Try to be proactive in this area. Beware of the written documentation, communication. It actually bites. So if you're writing something, it might bite you. Why? Because it stays written first, and because people cannot see you. And because sometimes you're struggling with time and you just put something and tap enter, and this is not what you really meant, right? You can use emojis. It actually helps to make a feeling of your real mood, right? Do not forget to be polite, even written, right? And the most important thing in this like remote working is pay attention to circumstances and always adapt. Constant retrospective, constant learning, and constant adaptation. Just be ready for the unexpected. If this is like point number 8, I will say so. Our conclusion after 6 months of this adaptation is that this became the new normal for us. So the team performance was not affected, and we had some guys working remotely. So what? No one actually cared, and we were happy. We had half of the team in London, half of the team in Moscow. Good enough. But then it came the COVID-19, and we were sent home to work, all of us. And we were ready. Well, kind of ready. We were not ready to work with children at home, obviously, buying our own coffee, or in general, learning the new work-life balance from scratch. but we are figuring out all these things right now. The basics from trust, communication, and feeling of a team was already there. And it's that, together with the ability and will to adapt, and not the physical place, what makes your team be an unstoppable force. So thank you very much, everyone. And oh, I forgot before finish, feel free to follow us on our social media. And if you like how we're working, take a look at our vacancy, Magic Lab, maybe. So we're looking for talent. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jairo. We can't see it right now, but I'm sure that everyone's clapping behind their screens. And we're going to go on to questions after this. I'd also like to thank Kelly from Badoo, who was supporting and helped coordinate together with Natalie from Novoda. So many thanks to both of you for this. We have some questions now, which we can go through. I think the first two were during Daniele's talk. So I don't know, Daniele, if you want to have a look first, and Jairo, feel free to jump in wherever you feel like it. We can do it more like a panel session this time. So just starting from the very first ones, the first one is, what are your suggestions for managing time in the stand-up and making it valuable? This person has been in stand-ups that seem to drag on. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Feeling. And also they mentioned that sometimes, you know, you can limit every participant to 2 minutes, but that's not always a good enough balance. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so it's a common challenge to keep stand-ups on track, let's say. What we try to do is to limit the whole stand-up duration, usually to 10 minutes, which of course at the beginning could be very, very tough. But after a while you learn with a bit of discipline that the idea of the stand-up is just to give an update and to raise quick concerns, blockers, questions to the client, etc. If these are gonna start a longer discussion, you can take it offline. The idea is that most of the time we just do a quick update. Everybody spends top 30 seconds, and then you can ask, hey, can you stay after the stand-up so that we can chat a bit more, so that everybody that is not involved in this discussion can leave, and you can continue with a more in-depth discussion.
You can also suggest to have the stand-ups in your calendar and to have the rules of the stand-up always written so people do not forget. And there is plenty of methods you can follow to keep your stand-up short, such as have a token, which might be a clock with an alarm, or you can even get a plastic sword and push people to be faster in the stand-ups. But practice makes perfect. So the more you practice stand-ups, if you provide feedback, that was very long, that was very short, try to say this, try to say that. After a couple of weeks, everyone will be highly engaged and will be perfect.
And if I can just contribute one more small thing. One thing we do quite well, I think, at Novoda is ownership of stand-ups. So we always have someone who's nominated to run it, and it's that person's responsibility to make it run on time. And at the end of the stand-up, that person will nominate who's going to run the next one. So it's always someone actually responsible. So I think that fits in with what you said about the sword, for example, where you have someone always enforcing it, and everyone knows who that is. And when that person says, okay, let's move on, it's not personal, it's just for everyone's benefit. And people, I think, usually are okay with that pretty soon. So yeah, I think then let's move on, because the questions are starting to rack up. So next up, you're talking about different meetings like stand-ups, retrospectives, so on. How do you deal with time zones when it comes to meetings?
Yeah, so for this one, it really depends on the kind of meeting. If it's a meeting which involves mostly one direction communication, like an announcement to the company, usually we try to do it in the time zone that fits most of the people, and we record it so that everybody can access that information later. But if it requires inputs from everybody, like it should be, we try to schedule it in the right, in a time zone, basically in a period which fits all the time zones of our team members. In our current project, for example, we reached an extreme where we have two stand-ups. One, which is client-facing in the morning, and another one after lunch, so that we can have, that one is just for devs, so it's more technical, where we can raise more technical questions between each other, and that's after lunch so that they can fit all the devs time zones.
Jairo, is there anything you want
We'll
to add?
answer. Basically, try to just put the meetings should be enough, not too many, not too less. Should be focused on topic and should be always a common time for everyone that of availability. Oh, one thing, it's really difficult to respect everyone's lunchtime. So sometimes you just need to sacrifice some lunchtime just because there is not enough in the enough space in the calendar. So if you have to do it, ask everyone first if this is fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you, Anonymous, for asking. Next up, we have one from Kishore, which I think echoes Chris's question as well in the chat. Please remember to keep everything in the Q&A session. So yeah, it's once COVID goes away, would you consider allowing team members to work remotely in the long term? And maybe that's for Jairo because
Sure.
Novoda already does that, as Daniele mentioned.
We are considering, but there are many things to consider. It will depend. It depends on many things. Where you want to work remotely. If it's from the same country, in our situation, many people are from abroad. So actually, people are asking, "Hey, can I go back to Spain to work and just work remotely?" But then it comes the taxes and many struggles for the company. Where are you going to pay your taxes and so on? If it's just in the same office, for sure we're going to relax our policies, and because we will be very improving our processes after this COVID. But this is still something we are discussing. We have not yet announced anything like Twitter or Facebook have done, so we're just waiting how everything develops.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks. So that's done. Here's one about trust. So is it possible to build trust without having ever met someone in person? Whoever wants can go first. Jairo, maybe?
Okay, that's fine. It's more difficult, but it doesn't mean that because you can go to the pub to have some beers, you will build trust straight away, right? And some people actually do not like to go to the pub and actually build more trust speaking in the chat, to be honest. So it really depends on the person, and it is possible. Yes, some things that you can do depending on who you talk. You can just grab your computer and show like, okay, guys, now we're going to show our houses, or tomorrow we're going to do, and you can just have a tour of your house, or show your pets if you have, or your children, or whatever. Something that relates to you without you actually telling about that. So there's something that they can see about you. It really helps. So there are you can find on the internet, there are plenty of tricks like in this time of coronavirus that people are doing. It actually works. It really helps.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I totally think that it's possible, like trust using these virtual means is totally possible. Maybe you can feel is less natural to you because we are used to have an in-person communication, but yeah, it's just a matter of get used to these new ways.
Yeah, and I really love the idea. Actually, I hadn't thought of that one before, of a tour of your house, for example, because usually you become associated with your background, but there's so much more to a person, right, than just the lamp that's right behind you now, for example.
Yes,
so yeah, that's awesome. Next up, throughout both talks, you introduced many new tools. Did your organization make it easy to use new cloud-based tools? Because in some fintechs or banks, it's hard to onboard new tools due to InfoSec concerns. Before answering that, worth mentioning that, at least for everything Daniele mentioned, there is a blog post already where we explain, or he explains, so I'm taking your work from you, man, where he explains what we use and why we use it, and that might be something you could potentially share with people who have these concerns, at least as a starting point for these conversations. But yeah, if you guys want to right now suggest or talk about your experiences with onboarding new tools, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, what we used to do usually is maybe if we are considering adding a new tool, we tried it with just a project or maybe as even a subset, a sub team, let's say, and then we see how it goes. Of course, we always consider the security implications of these tools. We are not all of us are security experts by any means, but we try to see at least if there are reviews, there are some indications about this, and then first we try it with a smaller set of people, and then we consider expanding it to the whole company. But yeah, we never had the issues with cloud-based tools so far.
So we've been very jealous with this topic, I can say, as well. Very protective. We've always tried to have tools which allows us to keep all the information securely stored in our servers. But these tools sometimes limit you. So at some point you need to balance and discuss this. And like in this situation of COVID, we've been quite flexible in this situation. But some topics we recommend not to discuss in some forums for obvious reasons. So it's kind of easy, but not always so easy. I can understand. I can understand you, Anonymous.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and think just use your common sense ultimately, right? So next up, okay, video, please. So I assume that's about the recording. The recording and tally, if I'm not mistaken, will be shared shortly after the event. So if I understand this correctly. Next up from Mustafa, what's your suggestion to keep the team focused on goals? So while you're working, people need to decide and make judgment of the priorities, and they might get distracted and work on something which was not a priority. So sort of, I think the question is around, well, he says micromanagement would not be a good practice. So basically, yeah, avoiding micromanagement, but at the same time, keeping everyone on board. Jairo, would you like to start on that one?
Yeah, sure. So we usually work with a long-term vision. What kind of long-term? It's like a roadmap for 3 months, quarter. So you actually have the vision, right? And we start with it with a set of ideas, which are not even PRDs nor nothing, just ideas. And we try to estimate the effort of these ideas. And then product works with design team and start building these ideas. Do not bother anyone, just on themselves. If they require to communicate with us, they do, right? But once this is done, it is assigned to one solid developer. In our development flows, basically it's based on this autonomy. So if you're in a project, it's yours since the beginning till the end, and you stick to it. Everything else, you don't attend it unless there is a very, very big fire around, right? So we try to have always 20% of the team dedicated for this tech dev, emergencies, and so on. And when somebody is involved in a project, that's it, the only priority, right? So it's having this in place together with good reporting. So you actually get to know, okay, according to the estimation, when this will be delivered. You had any blocker, you raise the blocker, and it changes the due date, and everyone is aware of this. So I guess I can summarize as clarify with the team who's responsible of what and who's accountable at this stage for what, and that will be it. By process, you should limit all the changes of context and so on. There should not be fires for everyone. You can, if you need bug fixer of the week, you can call it like that if you really need, but try to have a process that allows everyone to be focused on the thing that matter at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think having a clear long-term vision, plus, as you mentioned, being able to focus on the current goal for each one of us would be first solution that I would try to suggest. Of course, there are unexpected events, emergencies, which, okay, let's try to reduce them as much as possible. But in any case, I think that if these happen, and they will happen at some point, it's good to have a constant feedback loop, which you can have with daily stand-ups or every period, being a week, sprint, months, cycle, etc., where you can raise blockers, you can see how the previous period went, having a retrospective and to improve. So having constantly evolving procedures, that's something that we found very useful for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks for that. By the way, just to repeat again, if probably the easiest way to find out when the recording is going to be available is to follow us on Twitter or jump on the Slack group if you're not already, because that's where we share everything. That's where we will also share the list again of the tools that were mentioned in these talks. Next up, we have a question from Mirto. Do you think that COVID revolutionized the way of working remotely? And do you think that companies now are ready to potentially even become remote-only companies?
Well, I think that, sorry if I started this one.
Yeah.
I think that definitely COVID-19 made a lot of companies realize what are the opportunities of remote working. But this, what we are experiencing now is not fully remote, like it's a forced remote situation, which is way different compared to somebody that decided to go work from home because of their own choice. So having a proper dedicated room, equipment, and as mentioned, it's very good to have also the whole infrastructure. So HR plus IT supporting you. So that's not something that is true for most of the companies. Can companies transform into remote only? Yes, but it's not something that is for granted just because of COVID-19, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And Jairo, what do you think, given your recent experiences?
I think there is a before and after of COVID-19 in terms of remote working. And because, I mean, the reason is because most of the people didn't try, right, before. And once you try some things, it might work or it might not work. But if it works for you, then you don't want to leave it at all. You know, when I was working remotely and during this time, and I had plenty of meetings, right? But maybe in the meeting that you're having, that you are doing some, you're doing some, you know, gym or whatever, right? You can, because you're just listening, right? It's not only that, but in changes of context, you can just go to your house to do your stuff, right? So you have more time for your own. Well, if you are in the office, you need to fill these moments with something you can do in the office, which you don't have at home, right? So just go play the guitar 10 minutes, you cannot do it in the office, right? So all these things, like blending of work and life balance, is good for some people, but for some other people, it is changing the life for worse, because they actually want to go to the office to talk to people, to have some social life with colleagues after work. And but what is changing right now, at least, is the mind. At least everyone is concerned about this. And by the way, if there is something that will change after this, is the real estate business, because plenty of the companies have really huge buildings, and now what is going to happen? Okay, no one knows. So if we would know what is going to happen, we will probably already be investing on something. But never know. It's just perception has changed for sure. What is going to happen later? Probably we'll need to wait.
Well, we're going to find out, that's for sure. And the last question from Jeremy. Did you use cloud services to test apps on mobile devices for QA and automation testing? In an office, a QA can, of course, reach and get their company phone, pass them around. At home, how does that work? How does QA and engineer interact seamlessly?
That's a good question, and it's something that in our project we are still investigating. So we are evaluating several cloud-based solutions for this, but we still haven't found one that suits our needs. We are still under investigation, but I know that for some other projects in Novoda, we are using something like this. But to be fair, I wouldn't know how to reply correctly now, so yeah, we can maybe address this in another comment later.
In our case, we have different type of tests according to the pyramid of testing, right? But we have a lot of end-to-end tests for every feature we build. And we run end-to-end tests with simulators, but also with real devices. We use Calabash for that, Cucumber. And for developers, they used to get at home like 2 or 3 devices, each different screen sizes. And if you actually require more, we basically old-fashioned QA sends you a new device via courier. We're not struggling with this one, right? We only do that for emergencies, but we can do it. Also, QA assists a lot. All the QAs that are at home, they do not have only 3 devices, but probably 10 each. So we're quite covered in this sense, and we review the situation from time to time. Obviously, we will have remote workers like Novoda is doing. Probably that will be different, and this is something we will be adapting in such a scenario.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's buying devices sounds expensive, but at the same time, you're saving on rent. So there is that. But yeah, I agree that there's no perfect solution yet, and you have to be a bit pragmatic. And we have one more question, which is, will remote working be permanent? I think we kind of touched on that already, in the sense that at least people tried it. So now we're going to find the verdict, but it's not going to be overnight. Correct me if you guys want to add anything on top of that. Otherwise, we can wrap it up and stay on time, which that would definitely be a first for Londroid. So here we can see some of the advantages of doing things remotely. Thank you very much again, everyone who participated, attendees, and as mentioned, we're going to be posting the event recording on Twitter, and also we'll be keeping you posted for the next one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let us know, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.